I'll just read a little bio first before Lia takes over. Lia is a poet and writer living on stolen land in Nam. She grapples with the continuity and chaos present in contemporary living, using poetry as an intermediary to engage with our information environment. She graduated with first-class honours from the Victorian College of the Arts in 2020 and currently works as a freelance arts writer and copywriter. And she volunteers as a library technician with me here at ACER. Her first book, Bath Songs, was published earlier this year with the local press No More Poetry, and that will not be her last book, I'm sure. Thank you so much, Lia, for agreeing to speak with us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm just going to get my share screen ready. All right. So before we begin, I just wanted to acknowledge the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation upon whose land I stand or sit, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I believe as someone involved in knowledge creation, as Romney said really well, it is important to recognise the magnificent First Nations knowledge and traditions that have been carried across many generations. And I hope to play some small role in making space for that conversation. So yeah, my name is Lia Dewey Morgan. I'm actually recovering from COVID right now. Today's first day where I'm kind of not feeling too much worse. I'm actually getting better, but this talk is called Art is Antidisciplinary. And I guess it covers some of the things I've kind of taken from, well, studying art in the institution for about 6 years, and then working with a lot of, I guess, institutionalized artists. So I thought I'd begin with this picture of a phoenix that I discovered. It's a print found via the New York Public Library by a relatively lesser known printmaker, Alexander Anderson, a pioneer of woodblock printmaking in America. And this is a print from sometime in the 19th century, the exact date of which is unknown. Now, when we print, we remove a part of the surface in order to create an image. And so an act of precise destruction is paradoxically actually how creation begins. So as I show you this today, I have removed it from so much of its context, from the volumes of scrapbooks and commercial history from which it is sourced. Likewise, in this talk, there is a lot I will not tell you. There are many avenues for which we simply do not have time today. I will not tell you anything directly about my own practice as an artist and poet. I will not tell you anything about other pertinent stories regarding creativity, such as its connections with eroticism or craft or music or therapy. Indeed, I will certainly not be telling you anything about my transness. And of course, I will inevitably fail to represent a potential non-Eurocentric view of art. I restrain myself in this way in order to be able to tell a story. Otherwise, the image loses its definition. And so I thought I'd come back to this iconic Duchamp fountain. Now, if we think of the way he repurposes the urinal, it's this like contained disposal method. And then it's given this new name of this fountain, suggesting its unbridled new potential. Furthermore, if we think of this gesture of interpreting the poetics of such a work, asking what is art becomes a sort of cyclical game to be repeated over and over as a means of assessing knowledge, of understanding different approaches, of validating one's insider knowledge. So I have studied fine art, thus I understand why Duchamp's repurposed urinal is art. And as we speak of Duchamp in the context of European modernism, we also foreclose his other potentials, forcing multiplicitous thought into the lens of art. After all, Duchamp was a poet, a chess player, a member of the Dadaist movement, a survivor of war. And so the next person I thought I'd touch on was Ajay, who was a documentary photographer. But these works weren't necessarily considered as art. They were quite practical devices for artists and painters to employ in their practice. And he kind of unintentionally created a great catalogue of a dying period of Paris. And so it is thus we can see that art is not always actively declared, but at times it's retroactively applied. And thus it does not have to be consciously made as art to be enjoyed as art, in turn suggesting art is a way of perceiving rather than any particular essence within the object. Thus, we get this sense of art, and I should add other creative disciplines, capacity to make space for the beyond and before, the space of dreaming from which all disciplines, all form and formality emerges. And I love this quote here by Franco Buffo Berardi about it being the excess and the condition of revelation. So then I thought I'd turn to Debris Facility, who's a local artist. Their work, Stocktake, where they did a stocktake of a local artist-run initiative bus in 2018. And so they took an inventory of the entire gallery, detailing everything up to numbered pins and other minutiae. Now, the interesting thing being that silently, what was admitted was the most powerful force, the artists themselves and the audiences. So likewise, in our professional lives, the artist often has to omit this artistry in order to survive, with even professional artists offering a fifth of their working time outside the arts. For example, one of the most influential figures in my life, my performance art teacher, was actually also a postie, an electoral commissions officer, and a drum teacher. And I've taken this from like a NAVA report in 2017, I think it was, or yeah. And so as artists, we are asked to transcend our circumstances and become an image upon which the public can superimpose whatever value they deem fit. We are immensely vulnerable in this position, but by extension, we are also supremely creative, ready to siphon off whatever we can find, spare time, trauma, work experience, emotional mayhem into our practice. And this is a work by self-described reformed artist Lara Shamas, who is a colleague of mine, recreating and abstracting from her grandmother's prayer rug. And so I thought I might turn to the diversity of research interests artists have, which interestingly, because we're forced to work in other workforces, we then necessarily have to have this diverse array of interests. And thus it becomes that art really is a space of antidisciplinary experimentation, cradling the dying and newborn disciplinary knowledge within the artist's interpretive, intuitive, emotional capacity. And so when I say the dying and newborn disciplinary knowledge, I'm thinking about the excess, what goes beyond what is profitable or what is considered successful. And yet, when we go to major galleries, we're surrounded by these kind of really high investment works, and we come to internalize that to succeed in art, we must be ambitious. And in order to grow big, we require institutional support. I say this reflecting on my own experience as I stood before this wall at the MCA in Sydney when I was 16, thinking about my own trajectory. We imagine that going to art school may find us that sort of growth. And so the artist enters art school with a desire to make art and a willful naivety about why they might be allowed to do so within the institution, especially when there is a form of funding available. We come to the institution saying, we will use the institution, but it won't use us. And yet slowly, as the gaze of the institution turns upon us, we are sometimes caught off guard by, oh, sorry, just give me one moment. Whoop. No, don't do that, please. Sorry, I just have to find my note again. We are sometimes caught off guard by the volume of expectations and lack of support we receive, especially for artists who come from traditionally excluded backgrounds or identities. Moreover, there is often a lack of consideration with regard to how our work might affect us and a failure to consider students' mental health. The artist becomes a sort of testing ground for unconventional working conditions. And this comes from Ross Coulter's larger series Audience, which is this kind of weird time capsule of the audiences you might have seen shows at this point. And as someone in the community, it's quite strange because I recognize a lot of people. And so when we branch out to see the entire university, which ostensibly generates knowledge, it then takes on instead this character of a regulatory device, using disciplinarity as a means of literally disciplining certain conversations while enabling others. And I really recommend Hanya and Motten on this particular topic. They speak really beautifully about it. So coming into kind of the bread and butter of the first year students' kind of coursework, students are then bound to this quite restrictive way of using the artist's lens, with all of its objects in art history typically priced by the market as valuable and thus worthy of study. This in turn reifies a Western hegemony, which becomes very hard to step out of, both as students and, I imagine, as a teacher, due to a lack of funding and other supports to generate a new curriculum. More contemporary global art forums, such as the Biennale, are often haphazardly dealt with in 1 or 2 weeks during a late elective, when really they have the substance to structure several units. It is very odd and at times depressing to have the radical acts of a previous generation of artists be used as a means of stifling other possible conversations. And the two works here I have are an erased de Kooning drawing, so the destruction of art as art, and Elaine Sturtevant, who worked as one of Warhol's printers, who would then present the works that she printed for him as her own work. So copying and destruction become kind of critical to the canon. And it's a bit of an odd turn, but I turn then to negative theology by the feminist process theologian Catherine Keller. Now, this might seem strange to connect this with art. However, the dogmatization of religion seems highly analogous to art, a discipline intending to bring forth mystery, instead turning revelation into orthodoxy, and thus fundamentally missing the point. We can see often art, whatever that is, becomes stuck in commodification, in conquest. For example, Rothko. So Rothko's paintings are some of the highest selling works in existence, yet this was not the case during his life. An essential component of why this is was because his estate was stolen from his family and transformed into tokens for private profiteering and insider trading schemes. This sort of financial story exists behind the popularity of most mainstream artists, not to mention the use of abstract art as part of CIA's anti-Russian efforts to have America considered the vanguard of artistic progress. So we reflect and see the European canon as a sort of weaponized art history that both protects and decorates real estate for the wealthy. As referenced by Hito Steyerl in her wonderful essay Tank on a Pedestal in the movie Children of Men, a dystopic, infertile future proceeds outside, while internally art is preserved in a covenant of the arts without the public being allowed in to view it. So the art is preserved while the audience, who might otherwise be artists, dies, in turn stultifying our conception of art for the profit of few, perhaps none. So this is a photo of a temperature-controlled space to preserve the scarcity and economic value of paintings. It's a type of real estate investment, effectively. So this is a company called Wovo who offer, quote, bespoke private rooms tailored to each client's discrete needs while also hiring union-busting law firms. And if you're interested in this, it's really worth reading Hyperallergic's 2019 series, The Danger Epidemic in Art Handling, which, for example, documented a handler falling down an elevator shaft, to which staff first responded, "Is the art okay?" And thus we see that far from art being an object of nature, it is in fact an ongoing process regulated by security networks that hold it in this particular shape. And as an aside, I find it interesting that this quote comes from a paper discussing cybercultural studies as a sort of discipline, further suggesting mediation is necessarily anti-discipline by being in between. And so we return to the institutions relying on said warehouses and the work they store, this time instead seeing waves of death and horror bound in cliché. A collectible holding a dead collectible in a classical Pieta pose. It is sad, pathetic, dogmatic, laughable, detached, ironic. Wave after wave of anemic public funding for institutions has forced them to prioritize budget over long-term development, enabling the ongoing corporatization of art spaces reliant on blockbuster shows, fashion, consumerist art. See, for example, the recent show where advertising firms explore their views on creativity. The living local artist is rarely given space, nor is neighboring cultures. Yet again, God is dead, art is dead. Art is allowed to die over and over because of its anemic funding, while at the same time, the values of objects held by those trust funds and banks continues to inflate. We denaturalize the discipline of art and thus begin to internalize that perhaps there never was a discipline in the first place. I'm just going to have a drink and leave you on that big quote for a second. So I like this quote because basically, it suggests that certain disciplines are propped up by a lot of funding, while other disciplines with less funding thus go into a critical position. And you can kind of go through the university and look at who has the kind of most criticism and pair it with, well, because you have the most criticism, necessarily you have less funding, and because you have less criticism, necessarily you have more funding. Yeah, I find that very interesting. So we might think of Carnevale's work, Encierro, which means confinement, from a period of deep political instability and violence in Argentina, wherein the artist locked the audience within the gallery, who then had to deliberately escape and thus become an active participant of the work. They are reanimated in their engagement with what art is, simply by being trapped within it by the artist, forced to finally be involved. So art becomes a sort of documentation of attempted escape, strategies to lead us to another possible reality. In Cidarella's practice, he spent much time doing fieldwork with Politigram members, a collection of young Instagram users who would debate politics, eventually coming up with their own micro-ideologies, mashing existing ideologies to create bizarre amalgams, such as anarcho-Buddhism, Islamo-Nazbol, primitivist Juche. In this sort of work, we see a generation effectively hitting its head against the wall, trying to escape the Thatcherian "there is no alternative" of neoliberalism. So perhaps we might view art as a sort of means to poetically replicate how we are wasting, what, for instance, is going to waste in other disciplines, to demonstrate this once more in order to attune ourselves to another possibilities, a better way of waste. And we think then of Duchamp's urinal again, of a better way of waste. It is perhaps better than other ways of waste because it can be overtly aware of the necessary exclusion creation requires and attune itself to the very human emotional debt. Now, this is the blueprint of a work by Michael Landy, where he systematically dissembled and destroyed all of his possessions. And I think back to Debris' work at the start of this talk, in both instances revealing that after the tyranny of objects is shed, the artist, the human, the force of vitality still remains. So instead of this capitalist model of art as something to be acquired, we might then turn to see art as what is truly unacquirable, a sort of space beyond each and every limit, and thus we practice art by reaching these limits as fully as possible. So a critique of the intuitive connections within capitalism between success and profit, the possibility for something else. God. So I thought I'd mention here local practitioner Gabriela Imrachova's work, where we see performers receive scripts designed specifically for the space in order to create a stumble, suspending the audience in a state where catharsis remains unreachable, where transcendence is never met. If the art no longer carries the burden for transcendence, we might assume that we ourselves have to find that capacity to reach beyond this wasteful circumstance to something else undiscovered. While art might typically be demeaned as a waste of time or without clear purpose, while art may be typically demeaned as a waste of time or without clear purpose, this reluctance to encounter the excess of truth spilling over from other disciplines often ends up becoming a sort of weapon. And so to validate art's anti-disciplinary capacity is to in turn respect our human bodies that so consistently defy our understandings. I think of forensic architecture and the way they gather professionals from many walks of life to reinvestigate evidence that has had its expansive meaning foreclosed. In this work, architects and sound designers worked with tortured survivors of the Syrian regime to help visualize the Saydanaya prison. In this image, we see one inmate's impossible mental image of this prison. This creation would eventually encourage further investigation by both Amnesty International and the US government, revealing a mass grave on the premises. And my final slide, art has the capacity to just sit with the facts without having to declare a solution, which is particularly beneficial at a time where solutionist thinking seems to prohibit our ability to consider the challenge at all. Now, in this particular work, a countdown clock ticks towards the earliest date predicted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where our planet could exceed 1.5 degrees of global warming above pre-industrial levels. At 1.5 degrees, we will see more heat waves, floods, droughts, up to 90% of coral reefs lost and other ecosystems destroyed. Nonetheless, it is lost in an overstimulating city. It is actually down Platypus Alley in the center of Melbourne CBD still to this day, ticking away. And I guess it prompts us to wonder, does art need to offer a solution, or can it begin to raise kind of a question and a possibility? And that is my talk. And I have my text cited if anyone wants to screenshot them. I will leave that there for a moment. And I really like these servers and these websites, and they're really great for my research. So I just thought I'd link them. Thank you.